All right, this is the presentation 4 for Unit 5 over Europe, and this is over the history of Europe. Now, in class, we did this over 2 days. I'm going to do this all in one video, so you're probably going to want to skip around to the parts you missed. But the assignment in class, in case you missed class, you're supposed to create a timeline for each period that we cover. So you're going to have, I think it's about 7 timelines. And so a period is going to be like up here. So right now we start out with the ancient time period, and you'll create a timeline from 10,000 BC to 1000 BC, and then plot these events on the timeline where they occurred. And then for each time period that we cover, when you're done, you'll write a summary. And just a short summary, like 3 to 5 sentences explaining just in general what was happening during that time period in Europe. You know, kind of the big idea of what was going on. All right, so this one for ancient. So again, create a timeline for ancient, 10,000 to 1000 BC. So when we go back to 10,000 BC, basically from 10 to 7,000 BC, it's hunting and gathering. People are hunting their food. There's no civilization yet. People are just going around in small bands, going after their food and looking for it. So that was literally their worry every day is just what are we going to eat and where are we going to get some water to drink. And then you see a transition to domestication of plants and animals. That means we start farming. And this is the biggest revolution in human history. It's called the Neolithic Revolution. And this happened in 7000 BC. So Neolithic Revolution, 7000 BC is when we go from hunting and gathering to food producing. And the reason why that's so big is because that's what catapults us into civilization. So now villages are created. And then those villages are going to grow. Human population is going to start to grow because now there's a steady food supply. And as that food supply gets bigger, now people can do other jobs other than farm. So now they're going to start becoming artisans and things like that, and then eventually, you know, engineers and things of that sort. So now we start seeing civilization grow and grow, and eventually this is going to go from villages to larger cities that become city-states, and that's going to lead to empires that begin taking over. So it's just this gradual increase in civilization coming from that point. So that happens around 7000 BC when we start seeing people farm. And then still in the ancient time period, around 5000 BC, 4 to 5000 BC, you start seeing a large immigration coming into Europe. These immigrants are coming from the Russian steppes and moving into the continent. When you take world history, you'll learn about this as the Indo-European migrations. And so a lot of your Europeans today come from this migration group that came into Europe around this time period. And then fast forward to 2000 BC. The Balkan Peninsula in Greece, cities are starting to grow quite large, and now we're getting some big cities like Athens and Sparta. And these cities are city-states. You need to know what a city-state is. And so it's important to know Greece was not a unified country. And Greece actually wasn't a unified country until the 1800s, so pretty recently. So back then, the cities in Greece, like Athens and Sparta, were city-states, meaning they were cities that acted as their own country. So they have their own government, they have their own military, their own culture and beliefs. So Athens, for example, was focused on philosophy. The goddess over Athens is Athena, which is the goddess of wisdom. And so you're going to see that in their culture. They're going to be focused on philosophy. That's why you get guys like Aristotle and Socrates and Plato and Hippocrates and stuff like that. Some of these most amazing thinkers in human history come out of Athens. They also create democracy. So the basis of our culture today and our system of government comes from Athens. So they kind of start Western civilization. That's literally where it was born, was out of Athens. All right, and then you get into the classical period, so 1000 BC to 580. The Silk Roads cover this entire time period. So during this time period, and even on past it, honestly, the Silk Roads were used for trade from East Asia through the Middle East and then over into Europe. So all the goods went back and forth across this. Obviously goods, people, of course, migrated, ideas, religious beliefs, all that kind of stuff are going to go back and forth between this area. And keep in mind your major religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, take root right here. So right here on these trade routes where they can easily go out through different parts of the world as well. All right, then move forward, 400 BC, you get the rise of Hellenistic culture. You need to know what this is. So Hellenistic culture came about because of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was from Macedonia, which is right here north of Greece. And he became king at age 20, and then he wanted to conquer as much land as he could. He wanted to keep marching until he got to the end of the world, basically. And so he takes over Greece, and then he moved over to the Persian Empire, which is most of the Middle East. He takes that over, and then he takes over Egypt. And actually, when he got to Egypt, they just let him take over. They didn't even fight. So he gets Egypt, and then he marches all the way over to India and takes over like the northern half of India. So he gets this huge empire. And then Hellenistic culture comes out of this. So Hellenistic culture is a mix of Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian cultures. So again, Greek, Egyptian, Persian, Indian cultures all mixed together. You can get a new language, a new money system. People are going to start moving throughout the empire quite a bit. He created a new city, Alexandria, Egypt, which is like the center of of Hellenistic culture at the time. It was a very advanced city, had a large zoo, a huge library with almost 1 million books. Running water system. I mean, this was an advanced city. And so if you wanted to study and do anything at this particular time in history, you went to Alexandria. So you got people from India, the Middle East, Europe, all that coming to Egypt to study in Alexandria. So it was a big cosmopolitan city at that time. And then soon after Alexander does that, you get to the rise of Rome. So 275 BC, the Roman Republic is formed. And this was a democracy. They had 2 leaders at the time. Called consuls, and this lasts until 46 BC. That date isn't up here, but you need to write it down. So 46 BC is when Julius Caesar takes over, and Rome goes from being a republic to an empire. So when it was a republic, it had more of a democratic system of government. When it turns to empire, it's got one-person rule. They still have a senate, but it's still one-person rule, and it's more of a dictatorship. So 46 BC to really like 476 AD, Rome is this giant empire, ends up taking over the Mediterranean world. So everything from basically Baghdad and Iraq all the way up to Scotland and all throughout North Africa and most of Europe. 60% of the world's population lived in the Roman Empire when it was at its most powerful. So a huge empire. And I mean, the contributions they made to the world and, of course, to our culture and the foundations of the United States is huge. I could go on for days about the impact of the Roman Empire on our culture and the development of America. But we don't have time for that, so we'll go on. All right, so going on. Late 300s, Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire, which that was big because Rome persecuted Christianity for its first 300 years, killing them at the Hippodrome, dragging them behind chariots, feeding them to lions, and stuff like that. But even though they were persecuting Christians, Christianity grew rapidly. And Rome went from persecuting them to making it the official religion. Now, they didn't have to become Christians, but at least if you became a Christian, you weren't going to be fed to a lion, so, that's a plus. Then you get to the 400s, Germanic tribes start invading the Roman Empire. Rome at this point has expanded. It's huge to try to help save it in the early 400s. They divide the empire because the needs of the east side of the empire are different than the needs of the west side. So basically you get 2 leaders, one in Rome, one in Constantinople. And this one, Constantinople, becomes the main capital. So the western half in 476 falls to the Germanic tribes. It was too spread out. The military wasn't loyal enough. They had a lot of financial problems. It was very rural, that kind of thing. So they fall, and then the eastern half stays intact for several hundred more years. But this half falls in 476. And this is what's going to lead to the formation of new languages. So before, Latin was spoken throughout the Roman Empire. Once Rome falls, the people start moving to the countryside, and they spread out all throughout the European continent. Now, there's a lot of rivers, there's a lot of mountains, there's, of course, peninsulas, and so this causes people not to really interact as much. And so Latin is going to break down, and then now you're going to get new languages forming. So the language of Italian forms on the Italian peninsula. You start seeing French form over here, Spanish forms here, Portuguese over here. And so these different Romantic languages that come from Latin come from that, and then Latin dies as a language after this point. And then you have your Germanic languages as well. So German, of course, begins to form up here in Germany, and then English as well, which is a Germanic language. Will come out of that about 1,000 years ago or so. All right, now we're in post-classical, 500 to 1450. So it's also known as the Middle Ages. Some people call it the Dark Ages, medieval times, whatever you want to call it. So basically, after the fall of Rome, people dispersed to the countryside. There's no central power anymore. At this point, the only big strong power is the Byzantine Empire, but I mean, that's just on the Balkan Peninsula. Then you get into Turkey, and then, of course, the Middle East and North Africa. So for the rest of Western Europe, this is the Middle Ages. So there's 2 main things you need to know about the Middle Ages. One is feudalism, which was the social and political system of the time, which I'll explain here in a second. And then the Roman Catholic Church. So basically Rome falls. Now there's what would be called a power vacuum, meaning that no one's in power and someone's going to seek to take that power that's there, that's just kind of free and open for anybody to take. So the Catholic Church rises to power and becomes the most powerful social, political, economic, and cultural force in Europe. They control the continent. Because as people are moving throughout Europe, they don't really have anything uniting them anymore. Culture's not uniting them anymore. Language doesn't unite them anymore. They live in all these different areas, but the one thing that unites Europeans is the Catholic Church. It's the only church in existence at the time. And so that's the one thing they have in common. It's the one thing that they can all meet together on. So this makes the Pope the most powerful person in Europe. And of course, the Catholic Church becomes very corrupt during this time. People don't know how to read and write, and so they can change things and start making things up to gain more control and power. And so now the Pope is more concerned about his power and money than he is about the spiritual lives of the people following the Catholic Church. And so, I mean, the Catholic Church at this time is just straight up evil. All right, so feudalism, real quick. So basically, this is the social and political system of the time. You got the king at the top, and there's hundreds of kings throughout Europe at this time. There's tons of kingdoms. So you got the king at the top. Now, technically, the Pope is way up here because he controls the whole system. But you got the king at the top, and the king owns land. Now, he's going to give some of this land, I say give, like rent it out to lords in the form of a fief. So a fief is a piece of land that the king gives out basically to rent to these lords. The lords then will hire knights to protect that land, and then also will use my peasants, if I'm the king, will use my peasants to work the land and make it productive. Because in the end, that's where I'm getting money from, is the peasants farming and me selling that product. And so the knights are supposed to also protect the peasants as well and protect my land, if I'm the king. But a lot of times the knights actually would rob from the peasants and rape them and beat them and stuff like that. And of course, the lords weren't really necessarily always loyal to the king. They may want my power. They may want to take me out. They may want to kill me. I might kill them. So it's not really very loyal whatsoever. But that's basically the basic system going on. All right, now I get into late 700s. There's one strong kingdom that comes out of the Middle Ages, and it was started by Charlemagne. Charlemagne was a Germanic king, so he came from a Germanic tribe. And he united this area. So you see Germany, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Italy, Austria, Switzerland is kind of all in there, a little bit of Spain. But this is kind of the one bright part in the Middle Ages. And he brings back learning, so people are able to read and write again and stuff like that. But then he dies. This kingdom gets passed on to his son, who is an idiot. And then his son dies and passes it on to his 3 sons. Of course, he divides it between 3 kids. They're going to fight over it. And so 2/3 of it falls. The only part that stays is this part, which becomes the Holy Roman Empire. So this is what Hitler, for example, referred to as the First Reich, the First Kingdom. This is why Hitler wanted to take France and this whole area of Europe, because this used to be part of Germany as he saw it. All right, and then you also got the Muslims, 700s to 1400s. The Muslims have taken North Africa. They moved into the Iberian Peninsula and moving in towards the rest of Europe. They're also coming in on the other side as well. And then Vikings are in Scandinavia, and they're invading from the north to the south to get food and stuff because it's too cold up there in the north. And also Russia begins its first city of Kiev. So you start seeing the Russian state of Kiev develop, covering the eastern half of Europe. All right, so this is what it looks like going into the Crusades. And what I want you to see here is why the Pope would want to go to war against the Muslims. So the Muslims have taken over all of the Middle East. They've taken all over North Africa, Spain, and Portugal. And they've been attacking France. And then also they've been attacking Constantinople. They're trying to get in this direction and this direction. Keep in mind the Vatican is in Rome. So the Pope is sitting here in Rome. He's surrounded by Muslims on all sides. They're attacking on 2 different sides and sometimes coming across the Mediterranean. You got Vikings in the north attacking you up here. So you're feeling kind of sandwiched in. You're getting squished by all these invaders. And so it makes sense for the Pope to want to go to war against the Muslims, because if he doesn't, literally Europe is going to fall to Islam. So he's got to figure out something to do. And also, economically speaking, the trade routes, they go right through the Muslim empire. And of course, the Muslims get all these goods and they sell it to Europe at an extremely high price. And the Pope can make a lot more money if he just took that out and was able to get access to those trade routes. Then you don't have to go through the Muslims and buy it from them. You just get it yourself. So economically, there's going to be a strong reason to do that. But like I said earlier, the only thing that unites Europe at this point is religion. So the only way you're going to get people to fight, especially peasants, is if you can tie it to religion. The peasants don't care about trade routes. They don't care about saving more money and stuff like that for the Pope. They just care about the fact that they're going to go to heaven. And so the Pope uses this to his advantage to get people to fight. So 1096, the Crusades begin. And the Pope basically tells people, look, if you fight in these crusades, then all your sins will be forgiven. Because at this point, the Catholic Church has told people that there's certain sins that can't be forgiven and stuff like that, which is just stuff they made up to gain control of people. And so, because when you look at original Christianity, that's not what it taught. It was just, faith in Jesus will set you free. You will be forgiven of all your sins if you just put your faith in Christ. And they don't see that here at this point. The Catholic Church, you can't get control over people with that. You can't get control over people if you just say, just ask Jesus for forgiveness and you'll be forgiven. But you do gain control if you start saying, we have to forgive your sins, and there's certain sins that can't be forgiven, or you have to pay us extra money to get those sins forgiven. And so here the Pope says, there's really bad sins. Well, if you fight in this war, that will all be forgiven. So now you get the worst people you can imagine. Your murderers and your rapists and your stuff like that are joining in to fight the Crusades. And so, of course, that's going to end badly. So the Crusades don't work, and this is something that the Muslims still, especially extremists, put blame on the West today for, and are still angry about, are these Crusades that happened for 200 years. And then you get the Mongols. So as this is going on, the Mongols start invading and taking over a huge part of Asia and then about half of Europe under Genghis Khan. Their empire doesn't last too long. Russia's the area they control for the longest amount of time, up until the 1400s, but still it's an absolutely huge empire. And then we get to the end of the Middle Ages. We get to the Renaissance. The Renaissance is what brings Europe out of the Middle Ages. It starts in Italy. The word Renaissance means rebirth, so it's rebirth in knowledge and learning and art and literature, everything. So all of a sudden, and this is the biggest flowering of culture in human history, to go from not that much advancement over a long period of time. And actually, in the next slide, we're getting to the Black Death, coming out of the worst plague to hit mankind ever. You come out of that, and then you have the biggest flowering of culture ever. And we're still seeing the effects of the Renaissance today all around us. So then you get the Black Death, 1347. So basically spurs on the Renaissance. About a third to a half of Europeans die in a 4-year period. And I mean, it's absolutely horrible. And so, but out of this, again, you get the Renaissance. Also a good thing that came from the Black Death. It created a lot of job opportunities. A lot of people died, and so now there's all these openings for jobs and stuff like that that you can do. And then also there's a lot of land available because a lot of landowners died. And so now there's all this land that you can get. So now peasants are able to move up out of being a peasant, get their own land, and now they don't need to work for some king anymore. And then this, of course, with the Renaissance happening at the same time, people learning how to read and write, is going to lead to all this questioning of the power of the Catholic Church, questioning the power of the monarchs. And this is going to lead to revolutions. So this is really when things begin to pick up as far as changes go, and then revolutions are going to take hold. All right, so now we get to nationalism. So now early modern, 1450 to 1750. So let me go back. So at this point, Catholic Church has lost a lot of power. The Black Death really weakened it. Of course, people start questioning the church and stuff like that. And then nationalism takes root. And nationalism is where you're loyal to a nation, so a land or culture or history, instead of something smaller or something like that. So now like whole groups are feeling united. So this is going to bring up the modern day nation states. So this is when the states of like France and Spain and England and Germany and stuff like that begin to form. So people are loyal to those things. The good thing is, of course, is that it can create a strong sense of unity. The bad thing, especially in Europe, is that you get so many countries, so many different groups, that this can lead to war, conflict over resources and things like that. And so, but this is what's going to spur on the age of exploration. Because Spain, for example, which Spain and Portugal really lead this, they want to get access to those resources first. And once they realize they found 2 whole new continents, then England gets in, the Dutch and all that, and they're racing to control the world, basically, and get access to all the resources that are out there and all the gold they can get. And so age of exploration just takes off during the Renaissance. And then as that's all going on, early 1500s, the Reformation, the Catholic Church has already been weakened quite a bit, and this is the final blow. So Martin Luther, 1517, he has a lot of issues with the Catholic Church, the main one being the idea of, I'm trying to think what the word is. Why can't I think of it? Basically, the idea is that you could pay to get your sins forgiven. And you could pay like a certain amount, and you would get this special certificate saying, okay, well, now your sins are forgiven. Or you could pay for someone that's dead, one of your dead relatives, get them out of purgatory a little quicker, and pay for them to get out. And this was totally not biblical at all. And so Martin Luther, who read the Bible, realized it, and he had a lot of grievances with the Catholic Church, told him about it, and after that, a lot of fighting ensued from that. And when I say fighting, like debating. And this led to the break of the Catholic Church. So now the Protestant Church begins. So the Lutheran Church is the first Protestant church. And then out of that, of course, you'll get the Methodists and the Baptists and the Church of Christ and the Nazarene, and all these different groups are going to come out. Presbyterians and stuff like that. Indulgences. There we go. All right, so the word's indulgences. They would buy these indulgences to be able to get these extra sins forgiven. All right, so now kind of going over to Russia real quick. 1500s, Ivan the Great overthrows the Mongols in Russia, so finally Russia is free of the Mongols. Problem is, they just missed the Renaissance. So since they were under Mongol control, they don't really see the effects of the Renaissance, and Russia is pretty much always lagging behind the rest of Europe. They're trying to play catch up. And then 1500s, 1750s, Britain basically is becoming the most powerful country on earth. Globally, they have a global reach. You're starting to see British culture and the English language spread over the entire world as they begin to take over and become the most powerful empire on earth. And then late 1600s, early 1700s, get Peter the Great in Russia. He wants Russia to catch up with the rest of Europe, so he tries to westernize Russia. He actually sneaks, I say sneaks, he dresses up to be able to go into Western Europe and work there and just be among the common people and learn their culture and bring it back to Russia. He basically forced Russians to take on European culture so they could try to catch up with them. Then 1789 in France, you get the French Revolution. It's the bloodiest revolution in all of human history. I mean, it was nasty. And this led France to get rid of the monarchy and to switch over to, I mean, eventually to a democracy, but it takes a while. But this is huge because it's the first time that people rose up against their own king, put their own king on trial, and then chopped his head off, killed him. And so this is going to make all the other kings in Europe really scared, because if the French did it, then that's going to inspire other people to do it as well. And so you're going to start seeing a flurry of revolutions kind of go across Europe and see the monarchy begin to die. All right, and then we get to dawn of industrialization, 1750, 1914. So now, again, the British are leading the Industrial Revolution because they had the biggest empire on earth. They had access to all the resources they needed in order to spur on the Industrial Revolution. And then early 1800s, Napoleon is now over France and taking over most of Europe. But then eventually he gets defeated. And then we start seeing industrialization spread throughout Europe. Starts in England, then goes to Belgium, France, Germany, and then over to the U.S. as well. And so now, basically, your countries that industrialized first today are the ones that are the most powerful countries on earth. And all this is due to this age of imperialism. So you need these raw materials to fuel industrialization. This is what leads to slavery and things like that, because we need those resources to power our industrial growth at the time. And then over in Russia, you're starting to see really harsh working conditions. They're starting to go through their industrial revolution. People are working in factories 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, really low wages, horrible conditions. And they feel like their leader, the Tsar, doesn't care about them whatsoever. And this leads to a lot of unrest, which is eventually going to lead to a revolution there. Then by 1900s, the British Empire is at its climax. So everything on this map that you see in red is part of the British Empire. So this is where you get your saying, like the sun never sets on the British Empire, because it expanded all the way around the world. So literally the sun was always shining on it. And so that's why English is spoken in many parts of the world today. And then over in the Balkans, Bulgaria, Greece, Serbia, Romania, that area, they're starting to fight the Ottoman Empire to get independence. So the Ottoman Empire will fall in 1917, and they get their independence. But the problem is you got so many ethnic groups in this region that you're going to start seeing a lot of unrest, a lot of fighting there. World War I will actually start there as well because of all that. And you can see here, leading into World War I, all the different colonies. The British and the French have the most colonies. Germany feels left out. They only have about 3 colonies in Africa, 3 or 4, a couple in Southeast Asia. But by far the British and French are beating them. So the Germans want more access to these to colonies somewhere on Earth, and they feel like they're being screwed over by the British. So this is what's going to lead basically to World War I. So World War I, 1914, 1918. Your underlying causes are going to be nationalism, so the idea of like my country's better and all the other countries, we're the best, blah, blah, blah. And then competition for colonies, like I was just saying, Germany doesn't really have that many compared to Great Britain and France. And then your alliance systems. Alliance systems are supposed to help keep you out of war, because like you mess with one, you mess with all of them. But the problem is when you have 2 big alliance systems, and one country in one alliance system messes with the other country in the other alliance system, and they declare war on each other, then everybody declares war on each other. It turns into a world war. And this was a world war also because of the colonies. So they use their colonies in this fighting as well. And this turns into the bloodiest war in human history up to that point, because of their fighting techniques and the kind of weapons they used and stuff like that. And then it changed Europe quite a bit. So you see Europe in 1914 compared to Europe in 1919 after the war. So you see the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So you see the creation of Yugoslavia, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Romania gets bigger, Bulgaria actually shrinks a little bit probably. Greece stays there, Albania stays there. Poland is created, just comes out of nowhere. So is Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. And then Russia loses some land, and you'll notice it becomes the USSR at that point. All right, so newest stage of history, 1914 to present. 1917, so during World War I, Russia pulls out because they lose about, it's about 4 to 5 million people in World War I. So, I mean, they just got decimated. So they pull out, and then they start a revolution that kills another couple million. And this revolution, of course, is a communist revolution led by this guy, Vladimir Lenin, who starts the Soviet Union in 1922. And then soon after, Lenin dies, and then Stalin takes over until his death in 1953. But the Soviet Union expands quite a bit and controls all this area during that time period. And then you get to World War II. So World War I and the problems that created lead to World War II. Germany is really upset at the terms that it was dealt with in World War I, which is the blame for the entire world, the entire war, and they had to pay war reparations to every country they fought, which they didn't pay off until the year 2009. So you get to World War II, Hitler wants to bring Germany back to power again. So the Nazi Party at this time actually doesn't sound that bad. Like they just wanted to make Germany powerful again, make it great again, and bring back their military and things like that. Nothing about killing Jews at this point. So going into World War II, you have the Axis powers, so the bad guys. There's Nazi Germany and Italy. In Japan, and then they're fighting the British, the Russians, and the United States. Now, of course, within World War II, you have the Holocaust, which is the war on the Jews as well as other minority groups that were seen as inferior. So this is going to be your mentally handicapped, physically handicapped, your homosexuals, your Polish people, stuff like that are all murdered in death camps throughout, mainly in Poland. And then after the war, Germany is split up, so obviously Germany loses. West Germany is controlled by the United States, the British, and the French. And the eastern part of Germany is controlled by the Russians. And this stays this way until 1991. So the Berlin Wall is built in like 1961, creating that split within Berlin, because Berlin was actually in Eastern Europe. But the western half of Berlin was free, controlled by us, and the eastern half of the city was controlled by the Russians. All right, and then fascism, you need to know what this is. This is the ideology, basically, of the Nazis. And the idea with fascism is that you have a ruling class and a class that should be ruled. And so it's using social Darwinism. So the idea is that there's basically certain groups that have more power that should be in control, and there's other groups that shouldn't, that are not superior. And then you have, of course, if you apply nature and the rules of nature to humans, there would be certain people that wouldn't survive in nature. So like you're mentally handicapped and you're physically handicapped wouldn't survive on their own in nature. And so therefore, by us keeping them alive, it's actually going against nature. And so in order for us to actually live according to the rules of nature and according to what Darwinism calls, then we should exterminate anyone from the human race that would not survive on their own within nature. And this is also going to lead to him saying the Jewish people are subhuman race, therefore should be exterminated, along with the homosexuals and the Polish and the Russians and stuff like that. All the communists, we need to get rid of them because they're all subhuman. Left in nature, they would not survive, so they must be exterminated. We're actually going against nature by allowing them to live. And so from Hitler's point of view, he's doing all of us a favor by exterminating those people from the earth. He's not like he goes in seeing himself as this evil person. All right, so after the war, so again, this is what it looks like. All this area of Europe is under Soviet control, and that's, again, today why these areas are fading behind the rest of Europe. So you get into the Cold War, 1945 to 89. Cold War is this competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, but it's not just the U.S. It's the U.S. and all of our allies versus Russia and their allies. And this is a competition, of course, over military buildup. The stockpiling of nuclear weapons, space exploration, the race in schools, learning who's better at math and science and stuff like that. And overall, just who's a better country, what's a better system of living. But since we developed so many nukes, we get to a point where this new policy came up called MAD, which means mutually assured destruction, that we have so many nukes that it would just be stupid to go to war. Because if we went to war against Russia, we're going to bring about a nuclear holocaust and probably the end of mankind. And so it just got to a ridiculous point to where we realized, okay, we got too much. And then we started, last part of the Cold War, we start getting rid of our nukes, along with the Russians doing the same thing. But you have a alliance system, which you need to know. So you have the Warsaw Pact, which is the Soviet Union and their allies, versus NATO, which is our defense system with Western European countries. And as you can see, I say Western European, it also includes Turkey and Greece. So NATO still exists today. It's still a very powerful force in Europe. Warsaw Pact does not exist anymore. Russia, though, is still fearful of NATO. And NATO, over time, has expanded more to the east, which Putin does not like whatsoever. So NATO is still there, still strong, but not the Warsaw Pact is gone. All right, so in the 80s, USSR is led by Gorbachev, who is their last leader, and he tries to revamp the Soviet Union through glasnost and perestroika. Glasnost is openness, so meaning communicating more with the world, trying to open up more trade and things like that. And perestroika was a reconstructing, I can't even say that word, restructuring, there we go, their economy. So basically, he wanted to go from a command economy, fully communist, to a mixed economy. He wanted to start bringing in ideas from capitalism. But both of these failed. Of course, you also had Chernobyl happen this time. You also had a failed war in Afghanistan that's going to help lead to the fall of the Soviet Union. 1990, Germany is reunited for the first time. Berlin Wall falls. It is November of 89 when it begins to get knocked down. And then by 90, Germany is reunited. 91, USSR is officially dissolved. It was actually on Christmas of that year. So Christmas in 91, Americans were having big parties because the Soviet Union ceased to exist on that day. So it was a good present to America. All right, and then 1990s. After the fall of the Soviet Union, you can get a lot of hostility in areas that used to be part of the Soviet Union. So 90s, you see a split of Czechoslovakia into the Czech Republic and Slovakia. You're also going to see some civil wars and genocide in the Balkans, mainly Yugoslavia. So the country Yugoslavia ceases to exist and breaks up into several different countries. And this is going to lead to a lot of ethnic fighting. It's going to lead to a genocide that happened in the year 2000. And so it's really just been recently that this area has become more stable. But in the 90s and early 2000s, this area was very, very volatile. And then, of course, you have the European Union. And so this is, you need to know the difference between NATO and European Union. So the European Union is not a military alliance like NATO. The EU is an economic and political alliance among European states. Now, of course, this map is old now because the UK is now out of the EU, or at least on their way out of the EU. But most of these countries use the euro, not all of them, but a lot of them do. And also this helps ensure civil rights and stuff like that for people throughout the EU. Allows open borders so people are able to move from one country to another. And then also, really the bigger reason they did this is to try to keep from something like World War II happening again, or what happened in the Balkans, which is right over here, with all that fighting in the 90s. You know, more cooperation among member states will help Europe avoid another big conflict. Which is the goal. But of course, right now the EU is under a lot of pressure, and some people are speculating what the future of the EU will be, especially after the UK leaving the EU.